Hi, folks. John Cordisco back again. What a remarkable game. Remarkable game. This is where being a gambler pays off in chess. I'm not going to spoil it. So let's see the game as white. Luc van Wely from the Netherlands. He's playing on his home turf here in Vikensee at the 78th edition of Tata Steel Chess. I met Luc once at the World Open, got his autograph. He's a pretty fun guy. He's quite the ball buster, honestly, and he's a fun guy. And as black, someone that needs no current introduction in the chess world, current world champion from Norway, Magnus Carlsen. Let's get to it. It's going to be a Grunfeld, and I'll show you what I mean by gambler as we get on in the game. E3, castles, rook c1, bishop e6. That's supposedly a fairly new move, and that's the move that I used a couple times in the Grunfeld. Makes white take the pawn. Magnus takes with a knight. Knight takes. Instead of queen takes, he played bishop takes. Wants to keep the tension on this g2 pawn. Now this bishop can't move. Bishop takes. Give you an idea if rook can't take it instead. Queen takes. Queen takes. Check. Queen d1. Queen takes b2. And white's basically lost. After bishop takes, queen d7. So Magnus decides to sacrifice a pawn. He moves the bishop back to g3. He takes the a2 pawn. Now that can't be trapped. Even if he goes here. Because you've got queen d5. And he saves the bishop. Knight e2. Brings the bishop out. Knight c3. Moves the bishop back to c6. Now, it's okay right now. That pawn, or excuse me, the knight on b8 is stuck for black. But the bishop on f1 is stuck for white. So, small advantage for white. He's got a nice center. It's pretty solid. And it's funny, they were really surprised at this move. Luc went for it and went h4. That's also the first move on the computer. Not by much. The second choice on the computer by a hair's breadth is a b4. So h4 was the correct move. And it doesn't really cost him anything to do that. It doesn't weaken his king position. It's very solid. Rook comes over. Queen b3. Now this is a move Magnus said later he wasn't real keen on after he made it. Queen to f5. Computer liked knight a6. e6. I think it's more forceful. At least it looks that way. Still puts the pressure on the g2 pawn. The bishop on f1 still can't move. h5. Not to take any chances, Magnus decides to go e6. Just a consolidated d5 square. Okay, it's a game. H takes. H takes. Queen d1. Knight d7. Finally, the knight gets developed. As you can see, the bishop's still stuck on f1. Bishop d3. There we go. He gets his bishop out with tempo. That way, when the queen moves, the king comes over and protects the g2 pawn. So they're finally all developed. One problem, though, white can't castle. Let's go back one here. I think maybe instead here, Luc should have went castle. Now, granted, he's missing his h-pawn, but so is black. I think he would have been fine like that. You're going to see that's going to be a problem for him later. King f1, knight f6, bishop e5. Like I said, it's a game. The last few moves, it's slowly turning to Magnus Carlsen's favor as black. Rook a to c8. Like I said, no blunders or anything, just I think small inaccuracies that are starting to build up. Queen to d2 for putting himself in the pin. Knight g4. Bishop takes, king takes. Okay. It's a game. F3. Now this is where Magnus Carlsen decides to gamble. Now see if you can find what Magnus does here. Stop the video. At this point, we're on move 23. I'll tell you what I meant by gambling. Magnus probably has 25 minutes or so. And Luke Van Wely's down to about 3 or 4 minutes at this point. And he's got 17 moves to go to make the time control. Now, it is a 30-second increment per move that each player is gaining. Magnus is doing fair in this tournament. He needs a win desperately. Luke is the lowest rated player in the tournament. And no pushover by any means, but he's the lowest rated. Magnus needs a win here. He did something he normally doesn't do, but he took a calculated risk. Now stop the video and see what Magnus does here so you can find the move. What he does is he goes queen to G5. And even sacrificing the piece, it's still only 2/3 of a pawn advantage. Knight to F6 was the solid move. But after queen, pawn takes, rook takes. Now, of course, pawn can't take because you lose the queen. And the G4 pawn and the G2 pawn are up for grabs still. So he gets out of the way with king to E1. I think most of us would snap that pawn right off at G4. Magnus, a little cleverer than us, pins the pawn again. Now this is where I think Luke starts to miscue, and I think his problem is not so much his talent, it's his time. He's maybe down at this point a minute and a half. He goes knight to E2. Just trying to surround himself, his king, with pieces. Rook takes. Rook to G1, E4. Decides to go E4 to cut off that bishop. And also cuts off the scope of the rook a little bit. Now this is where the computer gives Magnus a question mark. And I'm really surprised that he did. Rook takes. Now it's about a point and a half, point and a quarter advantage for white. What he should have done instead, I think, was rook H8. And that's what I meant by gambling. He's hoping that the short amount of time for Luke, he won't find the right moves. And he didn't. Queen H6. King F6. Now this is where Luke, I think, loses it too. Move 28. We've got 11 moves to go before the time control. I think all of us, even the amateurs that we are, would have played queen to H4, which is the computer move by far. He decides to go rook to C3. And this is where it starts going wrong for Luke. Granted, the computer still is an even game, but this is really, really, really hard to play when you don't have any time. Give you an idea, after queen to H4, G5, queen to H3, rook takes, bishop takes, and white's sitting good. He's doing well. But after rook to C3, rook to D8, and now Magnus starts to turn the screws. Queen to H3, queen to G5, rook F1 check, king G7. And believe it or not, currently right now, it is an even game according to the computer, and I believe it as such. Magnus has 3 pawns for the piece. But Luke has 9 moves, and he's got a minute left. And he's getting a 30-second increment is all. What to do, what to do? He makes the right move. Queen F3. Rook D7. Good solid move. What he's doing is guarding the, he's guarding the pawns here. You can see the queen and rook battery. Queen to H3, rook to H1. All those I think are good moves. Rook to F2 is also a decent move. So he tries to get the rook out. I think rook h2 is a decent move right now for white. Besides, to go knight f4, and I can understand completely why you would want to do that. We have this check here, of course. Then the queen coming down. You'd have to figure it out, but I'm not sure if it's perpetual or not. Queen h4 for Magnus. That's a really bad pin right there. Now this is where I think Luke's, the pressure and the time pressure plus the pressure of the game. You're playing on your home turf. You're playing Magnus Carlsen. He goes bishop to e2. And that's the beginning of the end for Luke. Knight to g2. And after queen checks, king comes up. Rook takes. Bishop takes. Queen to d1. King e3. Queen checks. This is all computer generated. Bishop takes. Queen e3. g5. King takes. Rook d5. King h4. Bishop takes. And queen to f4. With less than a point advantage for black, believe it or not. Now, I don't think those guys would see this far through in that scenario. I think white could have survived this. But after bishop to e2, rook to g1 check, he has to block with the bishop. Now, this move here, the next move for Carlsen, I think is a waiting move. Putting more pressure, making his clock tick. It gives it a double question mark. King g8. I don't think it deserved a double question mark. e5 was the computer's choice. Then after rook takes, pawn takes. That's a much better scenario. But king to g8, it was a calculated risk that Luke, short on time, would not find the correct continuation. And knight to g2 is the computer's top move, rook to c4. I like knight to g2 myself, it's more forcing. He plays knight to e2, and that's it. It's over. If he had went knight to g2 instead, after queen takes, bishop takes, knight e3, I think it's survivable for white. I really do. But after knight to e2, here comes the grief. Rook takes check. King has to take. Rook checks. King g2. And then bishop takes e4, winning the queen. That's on move 39, just before the time control. Luke Van Wely resigns. Give you an idea, of course. Queen will have to take, and after queen checks, king g3, queen takes. It's over. I thought Luke played a hell of a game. It's just he used up too much time. Earlier in the game, he took almost a half an hour for a move. Right around the middle game, late opening. And that was his doom. Anyway, folks, so Magnus Carlsen rolls the dice. It comes up a winner in round 5 of the 78th edition of Tata Steel Chess. I hope you enjoyed it. Look for other rounds to come up from this, one of my favorite tournaments in the world. Maybe someday this is on my bucket list. Maybe someday I'll go to Vikings A and see them play. Also coming up in about 6 days or so, 5 days, is a Gibraltar tournament with all the great players. It's an open tournament, and my buddy Carl Nakamura's in it. So I'm going to try to do both at once. It's going to be tough. I'll do my best. Anyway, folks, they always say, if you think chess is just a game, you're not playing it right. Take care, folks. Bye-bye.